Imagine boarding a flight, settling into your seat, and suddenly witnessing an unbelievable confrontation unfold just a few rows away. In today's story, a flight attendant makes a bold and shocking assumption about one of the passengers. But this isn't just any passenger, it's a Supreme Court justice. The tension starts to build as the flight attendant challenges their presence in first class, delivering a moment that leaves the entire cabin in stunned silence. At first, it seems like a simple misunderstanding, but as the exchange continues, the layers of bias and judgment become impossible to ignore. Passengers watch in disbelief, wondering if anyone will step in or if the truth will reveal itself. What happens next will leave you questioning how far people's assumptions can go and what it takes to shatter them. Stay tuned, because this story is about to take a turn no one saw coming. As the cabin grew quiet, the flight attendant's voice became sharper. She questioned the passenger's ticket, her tone making it clear she didn't believe they belonged in first class. Other travelers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. The passenger, calm and composed, handed over their boarding pass without a word. But instead of backing down, the flight attendant scrutinized it like she was searching for something, anything, to prove her point. The air in the cabin felt heavier as whispers rippled through the rows. Who was this passenger, and why was the flight attendant so sure they didn't belong? What no one realized was that the person being challenged had faced moments like this before. Decades of breaking barriers and fighting for justice had prepared them for situations like these. But the question remained: would the truth finally come to light, or would assumptions prevail? The tension in the cabin was palpable as the flight attendant continued her questioning. She made a point of speaking loudly, as if hoping the other passengers would hear and take sides. Some of them were already whispering, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was it a simple mistake, or was there something deeper at play? The passenger, however, remained unfazed. Their eyes never left the flight attendant, as though they were waiting for her to realize the mistake she was making. The silence between them grew thicker with each passing moment. The flight attendant's demeanor shifted, frustration creeping in as she struggled to find a way to assert control over the situation. She asked the same questions, demanding more details, but all the while, a gnawing feeling started to grow in the back of her mind. Something about this passenger seemed different, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Meanwhile, a few rows back, another passenger watched the exchange with increasing discomfort. This wasn't the first time they had witnessed an injustice on a flight, but it felt like this one was about to escalate in ways no one expected. The voice from the back of the cabin cut through the tension like a sharp blade. The flight attendant turned, clearly thrown off guard. The new figure who had spoken up wasn't just another passenger. It was someone with an air of authority, someone who clearly knew more than they let on. The weight of their words lingered, and for the first time, the flight attendant seemed unsure of herself. Her confidence wavered. "I'm not sure you understand who you're dealing with," the figure continued, stepping forward into the aisle. "That passenger you're accusing, they're more than just someone who belongs in first class." The room went silent. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. The flight attendant blinked, visibly rattled. Had she just made a massive mistake? Or was there more to this situation than she could possibly have imagined? Before she could respond, the person revealed something that sent a ripple of shock through the cabin. "That's a Supreme Court justice you're questioning," they said, their voice steady but heavy with the weight of the revelation. The passengers around them gasped, some of them already piecing the truth together. The flight attendant, now visibly pale, took a step back. The truth she had been so sure of seemed to be crumbling beneath her feet. But just as it appeared that the mystery was close to being solved, a new layer of confusion emerged, because the justice, far from being offended, remained eerily calm, almost as if this moment had been expected. What had they known, and how deep did this story go? The flight attendant stood frozen, the weight of the words sinking in. A Supreme Court justice. She had never expected this. The room was thick with the stunned silence of passengers who were now piecing everything together. But even as the revelation hung in the air, the justice remained calm, almost detached from the storm around them. They weren't offended, they weren't angry. They simply sat there, quietly observing the growing chaos. For a moment, it seemed like the flight attendant might apologize, or at least retreat in shame. But instead, she straightened up, her voice shaking but loud. "You're not fooling anyone. Just because you're a justice doesn't mean you're above the rules. I know what I saw." But just as the tension hit its peak, the final twist came. The person who had spoken up earlier, who had revealed the justice's identity, stepped forward again. "Actually," they said, "you're wrong. That's not a Supreme Court justice." The gasps rippled through the cabin. Everyone turned to the figure now standing at the front of the plane. "This person," they gestured toward the so-called justice, "is a well-known impersonator. They've been hiding their true identity for years. They're not who you think they are at all." The justice's face tightened. The calm facade cracked just slightly, enough to send a jolt of tension through the room. The flight attendant, who had been ready to back down, now stood with her mouth agape, unsure of what to believe. The whole situation felt like a game of mirrors, truths twisted, identities hidden, and the very foundation of what everyone thought they knew crumbling. The mystery was still far from over. But in that moment, one thing became clear. Everyone on that plane was about to find out exactly who they had been sitting next to all along. And the real story, it had only just begun. The silence in the cabin stretched on, but it wasn't as tense as before. The man who had revealed the truth about the so-called justice stepped forward with evidence, a stack of documents that proved the impersonation. The room shifted as people began to understand the true nature of what had happened. The justice was, in fact, a well-known figure involved in a high-profile scandal that had remained hidden for years. The flight attendant, still shaken, finally exhaled, her suspicion of the passenger turning into disbelief and regret. She had made an error, and it had cost her more than just a moment of pride. Meanwhile, the other passengers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing how easily perceptions could be distorted. As the flight continued, the mystery faded, but the lesson lingered. Never let assumptions cloud your judgment. Sometimes the truth isn't what it seems, and appearances can be deceiving. And in this case, the real story was far more complicated than anyone had anticipated.